there you go. Anyway, I have another email here. You may be able to assist with this. I'll tell you why in a minute. Ross writes, "Hi, Jim. First things first, I started seeing you on television when you debuted on TBS, and my loving grandmother, who I never heard say a cross word about anyone, she would wish a horrible demise on you weekly, saying, 'I wish they'd hang him by his thumbs and cut his nuts off.'" I was shocked and entertained all at the same time.
Thanks, Grandma.
My question, sir, is this. Did the NWA committee have as much influence on the NWA World Tag titles as they did with the World title? That kind of took a left turn there, but that's what I wanted your help on. How many territories in the day had an NWA World Tag Team title?
Oh, geez. Detroit,
Charlotte.
Florida did at various points. Florida had various tag team titles in there, I believe.
There was a world tag title. I think a lot of times in the 60s and 70s, I think the Von Brauners may have brought that in, maybe.
Right. Well, speaking of the Von Brauners, I would go with Tennessee.
Yep, because there was a world tag team title in Tennessee whenever either the Von Brauners were hot or the Fabulous Kangaroos, because the Kangaroos in the early 70s were still, that name was still so hot and recognized as world champions from the run where they did the huge sellouts in the Garden back in, 1960, 61 or whatever. So they would kind of be recognized as world tag team champions if they came in. There was a world tag team title in Amarillo for a while, was there not?
Yeah, Amarillo. I was about to go to the West Coast before I was going to ask, did you say NWA members only or just anyone who is promoted?
Well, no, this is the NWA, because there was, then we'd open it up to Indianapolis, WWA had a world tag title, AWA, etc. But the point is, no, they didn't, Ross. The answer to the question is the NWA didn't give a fuck about the world tag team titles because by the nature of the beast of wrestling, the NWA and Sam Muchnick and the people who it was important to form the NWA thought that it was better for wrestling if there was one champion. This ran completely antithetical and was anathema to the standard operating procedure of wrestling promoters, which is always to say that my territory has the greatest wrestlers, so I should have the world champion in the world, whatever. So he got it done somewhat with the World Heavyweight Championship, but the tag teams would have been overreaching. And I don't think they were worried about it because, a part of it was adding credibility to the business, having one world champion. But when you get into tag teams, et cetera, I think Sam Muchnick or anybody else didn't want to die on that hill. So a lot of territories that didn't want to look too hokey, and once again, Nick Goulas never worried about that, but that didn't want to look too hokey would have a regional title. Even the Carolinas, before that George Scott expanded things in the mid-'70s and brought in Valentine and all those guys, they had the Eastern States Tag Team Championship?
Yeah.
Or there would be a regional title, Georgia Tag Team title, Florida Tag Team title, etc. So it wasn't too ridiculous. But then the Carolinas, to be honest, got to be a big enough territory and had the names where their world tag team title in the late 70s and early 80s was probably as close to a legitimate NWA world championship as you could get, where there was always top teams holding it, whether Steamboat and Youngblood or the Briscoes or the Funks or whoever the fuck. The world tag team title in Detroit was, the Sheik could do anything in that run from the mid-'60s to the mid-'70s. He could get away with anything. Detroit was on fire. It was one of the biggest drawn cities in the country. He didn't ever put the world title on himself. He didn't make his own. He had the U.S. heavyweight championship, and he put that on himself, and he kept it, but he was smart enough never to put the world title on himself, because then he would have had to have kept it all that time. He would have had to do a job if he hadn't. But he made world tag team champions for himself, because why the fuck not? And nobody outside of Detroit knew what the fuck was the difference. But so there were different sets of world tag team champions in the NWA, and they went along with it, and it wasn't a big fucking deal. But there was really, I would think in modern times, the Carolinas version was the closest thing to a real world tag title, just because the quality of people that held it and the business and the size of the territory. Just to me.
Yeah.
What do you but what do you think though?
What do I think about?
Enough talking about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think of me? Who would have been the biggest NWA World Tag Title, the best recognized, the most influential?
Well, you bring up the period of time where Mid-Atlantic really took over with the World Tag Team title, and that's at the same period of time where Detroit lost all of its influence in wrestling, and a lot of the other people who had World Tag Team titles weren't getting the attention. I mean, Steamboat and Youngblood were in the magazines.
Yeah.
So, that was the World Tag Team Championship in the NWA that got magazine attention from the mid to late 70s on.
And then there was really only at that point, the magazine, they recognized the AWA tag title and obviously the WWF or WWF tag title. And even though Indianapolis, as I said, had one, after the Valiant Brothers and maybe the Legionnaires in the mid 70s, Dave Dynasty's out there going, oh, fuck, there was other great teams, but Anyway.
After the Legionnaires, I don't know, were there?
Well, not the Legionnaires' disease, but Sergeant.
But after the Legionnaires,
were there, and Private Don Fargo,
were there a lot of good tag teams in that territory after the Legionnaires?
Because they came after Ox Baker and Chuck O'Connor, who would later be John Studd, right? They came just after them, and then of course Don Fargo took off, and they replaced him with Private LeBoeuf, who was the Russian stomper in Tennessee, who was Maxine Zaranoff LeBoeuf in the Maritimes in Canada, and was French Canadian.
When did you first meet Don Fargo?
Briefly in let's see, in 1970. Well, I saw him one time walk into the building in 1976, but I didn't meet him. So 1978, when he came back and was working with Al Green and Chris Colt for just that brief period of time. It was the first time I actually met him in person.
Intimidating?
But I saw that. Well, yeah, but no, not because it was one of the Fargos, yes, but no, he just was fucking fun. And he was actually the first night that I met him. He had come to the Gardens. He'd just come to the territory. And I was back there to take pictures. And he had a beef with the fucking Andy Frayne usher, the security guy they put on the back door because he's only supposed to let wrestlers in, right? Well, he didn't know Don Fargo because he'd just that was his first night in the territory. And it was after all the wrestlers got there. Don Fargo was late. Wonder why? Who knows? And he had trouble talking to the guy into letting him in the back door. He said, "Look at my face," because he had gig marks on his cheek, right? He had been doing brass knucks matches for Nick Goulas, and he had gigged his fucking cheek, and he had a gig over his head and his fucking broken nose and all this shit. He said, "Look at my face. I'm carrying a bag. You don't think I'm a wrestler?" And the guy let him in. But he was fun and he was easy to talk to once you got over the fact of look at that fucking face and it's Don Fargo.
What about Jackie Fargo? Was he easy to talk to?
Jackie, once again, I didn't get to meet Jackie Fargo in person until I was already well into photography because remember, I didn't start getting in until the end of 76. And Jarrett split off shortly afterwards, and so Fargo never came back to work for him until 79. So I had seen him as a fan, but then I'm actually a photographer. And oh yeah, he's just to say, "Hey, Pally, how you doing?" He'd walked in like that. "Hey, Pally, laughing at everybody. Smelled slightly of certain types of whiskey, and then he would come back up and take the pictures or do whatever. But yeah, I didn't get to spend a ton of time around him like the Fabs or guys like that, but. And Rough House was fucking cool too. Except when you were working against him, he was a stiff little prick. He was the stiffest one of the three of them, Rough House. He'd fucking hurt you when he looked at you.